Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages good discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm Kevin Quinn. Our special guest is Juan Valdés, the official geographer of the National Geographic Society, and we'll discuss his career with National Geographic and the various facets of map making. Juan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, we're also going to talk about your own personal story, which is fascinating, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the organization you work for, National Geographic. Yes. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the National Geographic was founded in 1888. I'm very happy to say that in 1915, the cartographic division was founded, so we're coming up on our centennial for that division. We have been exploring this world, the universe, since the magazine was founded, and we have done that through various means. Today we're doing it through the channel, the magazine, our apps. There's several apps out there, especially cartographic apps that are available to the public. The magazine has also gone digital, so you can access many of its articles on an iPad or iPhone. So we're in touch with what's going on today and in the future as well.
We were talking a little bit before we started airing about the history of the organization. It didn't start off as a TV producer and even a magazine producer so much, right? It was
That's right.
An Explorer Society.
It was very much a scholarly journal. If you go back to the very first issue, very detailed, almost dry articles. But I'm very honored to say that the very first issue of the magazine also contained maps. There was an article about a storm that occurred in the spring of 1888 on the east coast of the U.S., and there were very detailed maps associated with that article, which sort of gave our readers an idea of the role of cartography in telling the story along with the text.
Well, when I think about the sort of the turn of the century exploration, I think about exploration of the poles, parts of Africa, et cetera, and I'm guessing National Geographic was all over that at the time.
We were indeed, and now we're all over the ocean floor. We're still exploring some parts of the Amazon. We'll be doing an article in the not too distant future about some new things, new findings. So it's a big world out there.
I mean, I think a lot of us think, well, we've mapped everything, right? I mean, we know where everything is, even in the deepest, darkest part of the Amazon jungle.
Well, just about, yes. But it's all a matter of refining those findings. So just because it's been mapped, how accurate are those maps?
Well, I'm guessing that there are parts that have hardly seen any human interaction. We don't know what the flora and fauna are there. I mean, there's still much to find out.
There is still much to find out, but the technology is there to just give us a little extra push.
Well, tell us a little bit about your role. The geographer sounds like a pretty important job.
Well, it is an important job, but I wear multiple hats. So my first title is the geographer, and basically what I do is I monitor the world on a daily basis. If there are any new developments that come up that would impact not only our maps, but the content of our articles or other projects, I bring that to the attention of the Map Policy Committee, which consists of the higher echelon of society members or society staff. And then I make proposals. We should treat this entity this way on a map. We should address it this way toponymically. They review it and tell me whether or not the society approves of such changes, and then I'll follow through and disseminate the information throughout the society so they're aware of these changes. The other hat that I wear is Director of Editorial and Research, which, simply put, I have to make sure that every map that comes out of National Geographic is correct.
That would be good. Otherwise, there'd be lost people all over the world.
Yes, indeed.
So map policy. I mean, I think, we live in an age where map is about as common an item as can be imagined. I mean, it's hard to think about a world without maps.
That's
and, like many other, pre-digital technologies, I think we sort of take for granted the fact that there's a lot that goes on into making a map. So tell us a little bit about what sort of policies are involved with map making. Aren't you just drawing lines with it?
Oh, no. You first of all, there are multiple levels of sensitivity, may I say. The first thing you have to be very careful of is how you portray international boundaries or borders. Slip of a pen or a slip of the mouse can get you in a heck of a lot of trouble. Then place names. What kind of place name conventions are you going to follow? If a territory is occupied by another entity and that entity's occupation is not recognized internationally, how are you going to portray that place name? So it's a very delicate balance when it comes to how we map the world. We have to be very careful, very cautious to make sure that we portray it as fairly and as accurately as possible.
So that's an interesting question. I mean, if we decide to occupy a certain part of De Pere and declare our own country, I'm guessing that we probably won't get recognized by National Geographic or anybody else on the map. So what is the threshold?
Well, we have several criteria set for such things. So, for instance, let's just say an entity declares independence. Okay, they've declared independence. Has that declaration been internationally recognized? If yes, okay, that's check number 2. Then the last part is it recognized by the neighboring countries? It might be recognized internationally, but those around it, do they understand that this is a separate political entity? Then we have to weigh very carefully which way to go. If the general international consensus is, no, this is occupied territory, then we will relay it as such on our maps. We'll classify that as an area of special status.
Of special status?
Special status, yes.
And that's where you sort of put the lines through it this way.
Well, we usually use the color gray.
Oh, the color, really?
Yes,
okay.
And then depending on how much scale or space is permitted on the map, we'll do a very detailed but concise note to let the reader know that as of X date, this entity declared independence, but it is yet to be internationally recognized.
So you mentioned gray. I mean, are there other sort of standardized colors? I mean, when I think of a map, I think, okay, it's got pink and green and orange and brown. Are there, other than aesthetics, are there reasons to choose a certain color palette? Or?
Well, in our case, it's been a tradition that's been handed down from one generation of National Geographic cartographers to the other. So when a new country comes online, the first question that we have is, how are we going to color it? We can't create a new color, so we just look around and we change the colors surrounding that new entity so that it sort of blends better. We don't want to repeat colors, especially when you have two colors bordering this.
But you mentioned something else. You talk about place names.
Yes.
And I mean, you would think that's a pretty, what do people call it? I mean, you'd think that was a pretty non-controversial thing.
Well, it might not be a non-controversial issue for Americans, but those are fighting words in some parts of the world. So, for instance, not too long ago, the state of Virginia decided to recognize the East Sea as a name for the Sea of Japan.
The state of Virginia?
The state of Virginia, to add it to their textbooks. That sort of caused a bit of friction with the Japanese because the Japanese do not recognize the term East Sea for that body of water. However, the Koreans do, and a lot of other countries do. So in our case, we always make it a point whenever, again, where scale permits, we have the Sea of Japan labeled on a map, we always make sure that we have East Sea in parens. And again, if we have more scale, then we have this detailed note letting the reader know that although it's known as the Sea of Japan, the Koreans recognize it as the East Sea, as do others.
Wow. So do you issue a new world map every year, every 6 months? Is it a living, breathing document?
It's a living, breathing document. Our revision cycle is basically every 3 months.
Every 3 months?
Yes, and you'd be surprised how many changes can occur. From our perspective, it's a wonderful thing. It's job security. So as far as I'm concerned, the world can keep on changing on a daily basis.
I recently was cleaning out some stuff, and I found a globe I had from the 60s. As a kid, I used to pore over it. And one of the things I amused myself for longer than I should have was looking at all the places that look different now. Of course, the USSR might be the biggest one that is different, but it was truly surprising how vastly different the world looks now than it was then. Of course, the land masses are generally in the same place, Hawaii notwithstanding. but for the most part, it is a living, breathing thing.
It is, very much so. And one of my biggest challenges is just staying on top of it every single day. So much is changing. It's sometimes hard to get a hold of.
Well, I was doing a little reading and about the importance of maps. The most ubiquitous thing perhaps ever is a map. And there's a professor whose name I forget at Berkeley, I think, who makes the claim that advances in map technology are what led to the modern nation state in Europe. And so talk a little bit about the history of when was the first map? Does anybody know?
Well, someone asked me that question the other day, and I did a little research on the web, and I got many conflicting answers. Maps going back to the Babylonian period, some maps going back earlier than that. So I'm sure somewhere under the sands of some Middle East country, there's one of the world's first original maps.
Well, I can't imagine at some point somebody didn't ask somebody, hey, how do I get over there? And someone drew in the sand, okay, you go here, you do this, you do this. Somebody did that someplace.
Pretty much so.
Maybe even on a cave wall, okay, where was the woolly mammoth? Okay, take a left at the rock and, all of that. There must have been something like that because humans are not that fundamentally different than they were 10,000 years ago, I think. I mean, their emotions, et cetera, are the same as they always were.
Okay, the Babylonians had clay tablets on which they wrote information on. Clay tablets. Fast forward a couple of thousand years, we're going back to the tablet again.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Using our finger to access maps and write down information.
Were the first ones Android or Macs?
They were clay.
They were clay. But it is, it's true. Humans haven't changed that much. We still interact with our world, I think, fundamentally the same way. We have better tools to do it, and we probably have a deeper understanding of how things are connected. But I think that's probably the appeal of the Bible, not just as a religious document, but as literature. It's a collection of great stories about human nature that seem to be pretty immutable.
Timeless.
Well, of course, as a kid growing up, we hear about how Columbus proved the world was round, which I think has been largely, that's largely baloney. So how long ago did we really understand that the Earth was a spheroid and not just flat like the way we see our maps?
It goes back to the Greeks, if not earlier. Eratosthenes did a map of the world as he knew it, but the shape was there. So there was the concept that it was not a flat Earth, it was a round Earth.
That's pretty amazing.
It is amazing.
Because you didn't have, they didn't have telescopes, they didn't have any way to, how did they know?
A series of mathematical calculations, basically looking at the sun, the stars, the horizon.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow. Doing that kind of math, well, if you have Roman numerals, trying to take the logarithm is probably a pretty difficult thing. They must have had other kinds of heuristics to do to do that. And here's another question. When we look at maps, the world map, of course, being Americans, there it is, North America right in the middle of the map, right? And I would imagine that's a choice that probably at some point or another here in this country has been politicized. Do you put Europe in the center of the map? Do you put the U.S.? Is it just sort of the home field advantage? Is that how?
Well, part of it is the home field advantage. That's what most people are accustomed to. But not too long ago, we decided to remap the world, and we centered the projection right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So what the eye catches first is that vast body of water, and then its surrounding continents, and it gives you a entirely new perspective on what the world looks like.
It would, because like I said, growing up in Cold War America, right there, and I grew up in Chicago, so Chicago was in the middle of the country, which was in the middle of the map.
Yes.
That was awesome. I thought the world revolved around me like every other kid that was growing up in the 60s. Are we raising a generation of folks who no longer have the skill of being able to read a map? Is that a worry that you have?
My biggest worry is that the younger generation doesn't realize that a map is a living entity. It's something to be studied, something to be analyzed. It's something that tells a story. And in today's generation, everything's a quick read and you move on. A map is not for that. A map is for you to just delve into it and ask yourself thought-provoking questions.
There's something just that can't be duplicated, even with the coolest Google Earth, which is cool. And what's the first thing everyone does when they get on there? Let me see my house. Right?
Exactly right.
That's my car parked there.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about your own background, which is absolutely a fascinating background. You were part of the Peter Pan program.
That's
which
correct.
I'm not sure a lot of people know as much about that as maybe we should. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you've heard about these Central American children that have been sent by their parents to come to the United States on their own. It's not a new phenomena. It occurred some 50 years ago where 14,000 Cuban children were sent on their own to the United States.
14,000?
14,000.
From a relatively small island.
From a relatively small island. And in some cases, they were sent to family or friends. In other cases, they were sent to orphanages, a myriad of places. The reason being was that their parents did not want them to be indoctrinated in socialist philosophy or ideals. So we started a new life on our own without our parents here in the States until they arrived. In some cases, in my case, I was very fortunate. My parents arrived a couple of months later. In other cases, families were never reunited. So that's part of my origins here.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine, and I read a Washington Post article about this that was an excellent article that went into great detail about what that must have been like. So you were 7 or 8 years old?
I was 7 years old, yes. One morning I was awakened and taken to the airport. My parents gave me a hug and a kiss and told me, "We'll see you soon." All of a sudden, a couple of hours later, I find myself in Miami, a very strange place where people didn't speak Spanish, and I learned.
Now it's a very strange place where people do speak Spanish.
Indeed.
So this is 61 or 62.
61.
What was Miami like? I mean, we think about Miami now and, Miami Vice and, South Beach and all that kind of stuff, fashion models and, Scarface and all that. What was it like then?
The Miami of 1961 through 1963 when we were there was a very small backwater town. In many cases, Cubans were not welcomed at all. It was difficult. One of the reasons that we left Miami was just for that. Economic availability was rather limited, jobs were scarce, so the United States government started a relocation program. And they partnered with a lot of churches, synagogues, etc., to get families settled throughout the United States. And we got into one of those programs, and we moved to Washington, and been there since 1963.
Looking at some of the pictures that you supplied to the Washington Post, I was struck by how someone who was a member of the upper middle class that you were there, which all of a sudden became not all that welcome in the early 60s in Cuba. I was really struck by how similar your childhood seemed to have been to my own. That I don't think it was, there was a great Americanization of the island at the time.
Very much so. I mean, it was, I talked with many of my schoolmates, and it was basically a parallel life. We would watch Saturday cartoons, Roy Rogers, Perry Mason, you name it. We were aware of what Halloween was all about. Santa Claus was a big thing, although we celebrate after Christmas, but Santa Claus was part of our life.
The sales are better then.
The sales are better then, yes.
and of course, here we are. The Castros are still running it, and we were talking last night. I mean, Kennedy, Nixon, Khrushchev, gone. Okay, De Gaulle, gone. They're all gone.
They're all gone.
And the Castros,
they're still there.
Live on.
Yes.
And the folks that are there, how do they regard the Castros and this long arc of history? I mean, how do they feel about how all this stuff happened? Are they resentful of the Americans for this, or?
I don't think they're resentful of the Americans. I mean, it's a homemade phenomena. Many people still believe in the system and believe in the Castro brothers. So as long as that is taking place, the status quo will remain.
I mean, it just seems to me as an economist to be fairly inevitable that something will happen and then the tide will rush in and it'll be cruise ships and, Sandals resorts and all of that.
Perhaps, but the Cuban mentality is such that structure and order are very important. So in many ways, the Castro brothers and the current system feeds into that mindset.
Does the church have a strong role, no role?
No, there are church services and freedom of religion from what I've seen. I've been there several times. And there's Sunday Mass, Saturday worship at synagogues. Yeah.
I read that you recently actually put together a brand new map of Cuba.
Yes, I did.
So talk about that. Why did the world need a new map of Cuba?
Well, when the idea came to my mind, it coincided with the opening up of the people-to-people program between the U.S. government and the Cuban government. So I went to my superiors and I said, look, this is happening. We really don't have a very good detailed map of the island. The last one that we did was in 1906. And so
well, maybe the CIA's put together a couple of maps.
A little bit long in the tooth. So after a couple of months of analyzing the situation, they gave me the green light. And I was able to, with the crew of 4 cartographers, put this map together. For me, it was a daily reminder of things past. I lived my past for 9 months every day when I went to the office. But I'm very proud of that map. In many ways, I see it as my contribution to the society for all the society's done for me.
And so what were some of the major differences between this one and the 1906
Well,
map?
yeah, the infrastructure you had
Roads,
had
right.
new highways, new rail connections, airports, ports, a new pipeline that had just opened up running from the north side of the island to the south. So a myriad of changes. 2 brand new provinces that came online when we were making the map. So it's the latest and greatest map out there. And when I returned on my last trip, I brought several copies of them with me. One of them was to hand to my 2 remaining family members who I hadn't seen in some 50-odd years.
50 years.
Yes, and I very proudly gave it to them.
What's it like to meet a family member after 50 years?
At first, it was a little awkward, but then all of a sudden things just started coming out. You remember this, do you remember that? And all of a sudden, all those years just melted away.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Even though vastly different life experiences,
yes,
I'm guessing.
yes. But, at the core, blood's thicker than water, and it was a great experience.
Well, I mean, the Cubans have always been very family-centric, as
Yes.
far as I can tell. And,
Yes.
and that's, I think, one of the strengths and one of the reasons why, in fairly short order, many Cubans went from literally being refugees with nothing to being very successful socially, economically in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to this day, the Cuban community has tremendous influence over what happens there.
Very much so.
And
yes.
and to me, as a tourist, I utterly welcome that. I find Miami to be one of the most diverse, truly international American cities there are. I mean, New York obviously has its character about it. Washington, it does too. But it's a little less authentic to me in each of those cases. I think about New York. I think about the Moscow on the Hudson,
Yes.
movie and that experience. That was during the rah-rah 80s where we were sure we were awesome again. But it seems to be much more natural for what happens in Miami. I mean, it's probably fair to call it a Latin American city.
Very much so, yes.
I don't know what the demographics are exactly, but it's got to be fairly reflective of that.
It's
too.
very, very reflective of that. Not only do you have a large number of Cubans, you have many, many, many Venezuelans coming in now, Central Americans, South Americans, so all of Latin America can be found there.
And my sense is, not being Latin American myself, is that there is cohesion among the various Latin American communities, but there's also a little distance that exists.
Yes,
Is that a fair point?
Yes. We all have our unique histories, our unique identities, and we're very proud of the fact. So, there is that certain separation, but what binds us together is a language.
Is it similar to the way we look at the Brits or the Irish or the Australians, or is it a little more nuanced than that, perhaps? Because we all claim the Beatles.
Yes, we all claim the Beatles. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, yeah. We try to be as polite as we could possibly be with one another, but we have our moments.
That's interesting. Well, I want to ask you about, we have a couple minutes left here. I want to ask you about trains. You're a bit of a train buff.
Oh, I love trains. I'm a great model railroader. And here again, this all stems from Cuba.
Talk about that.
Well, when on my 6th birthday, my father got me a O-scale Marx train set.
O-scale, the big one.
The big one. I loved that train more than life itself. I would play with it every day when I got home from school, on the weekends. On the day that I was put in the car to go to the airport, my father took me aside and said, take 2 things, take your 2 most favorite things. So I took my engine and I took a bag of little airplanes. When I went through the airport gates, you were, like they do today, they monitor you, they check to see what you're carrying. And I recall the train being taken away from me. And I had always, through these years, someone took my train at the airport. When I returned to Cuba in 2013, I was at my cousin's house and we were talking, and I said, you know, this train has been in my dreams all these years. I wish I could get my hands on it. He got up, went into the room, came back, the train in hand. I was speechless. Where did, someone had taken this away from me. Who? This is what happened. Your father knew how much you loved that train. While you weren't looking, he took the train away. And when the plane took off, he went to his brother's house, my cousin's father, gave it to his brother and said, hold this. Juan is going to come back and pick it up. So that train sat for 53 years on the shelf. He forbade his son and his grandsons from playing with it to make sure that I would get the train when I came back. When he died on his deathbed, he told them, Juan's coming back. Make sure he gets that train. Oh. My cousin kept his promise. I have that train in my house.
Oh my gosh. That's quite a story.
It is quite a story. So that's my connection to trains, and you know, my wife is driving me crazy because she says, I need to stop buying trains. That's a whole story in itself.
Well, I hope you get a chance when you're in Green Bay to visit the National Railroad Museum that's here in town.
I'm going to give it a try.
I think they have quite a few pieces, historical pieces. And I remember taking my mom through there, oh gosh, almost 20 years ago, and they had a train there that she had rode on in the 30s and 40s as a child, and it hadn't been refurbished yet. It was in terrible disrepair, and just the mix of emotions that she was clearly going through. And I'm reconnecting with this train that meant so much to me, because getting on the train in the 1940s was a big deal to a kid. But yet the seats were completely beat up and all that sort of thing. It was. I don't think she ever quite got over seeing that train. Well,
I know the feeling well.
Unfortunately, really unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your stories with us and your insights. It's been an honor for us too. And I hope you've enjoyed our show. Until next time, I'm Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College.